Hi, it's Dr. Scott Langford. I'm excited to do my first little mini lecture discussion starter for week one for Oliver Twist. Partly, I want to begin by reminding you that the whole point of the course is where did you get your ideas of childhood from? How many of them came from Dickens and Oliver Twist? But let's not assume that that's where they come from. Let's make that a question. Because partly it depends on where in the world did you come from, right? Where's your family from? Where's your linguistic heritage? What's your cultural heritage? What's your religious heritage? What's your economic status, even? If you were, for example, I lost my book. What if you grew up in Tibet? Well, maybe some of you did. I don't know you yet. Is the experience of these boy monks in any way similar to that of Oliver Twist? In any way similar to mine? In any way similar to yours? Or is their experience so different that there's no equating them, right? So that's the question that we're exploring here. Now, we explore it with Dickens because so many of the ideas that we imported from England, we imported our language from England, much of our culture from England, much of our legal system from England, but much of the sort of standard white-bread American idea about what it means to be a child, quote unquote, comes from Dickens. The fascinating thing being that this is his second novel, and as you've seen when you read those early chapters, there's no recognizable child in a way in there at all. I mean, Oliver, he's born as an orphan, and then he's a workhouse slave. He's an industrial worker from the time that he can stand on his 2 feet, right? And then he's sold like a slave, an indentured servant, and apprenticed, and then becomes a runaway homeless thief in London. All of these have nothing to do with the innocent Victorian idea of childhood that is inhabited by, say, Alice in Alice in Wonderland. But later in the novel, if you keep reading, Oliver wakes up as this other child. He wakes up in a bed with clean linens, and a family that's wealthy in a wealthy part of London, in a perfect wealthy part of London. And he's treated as this innocent, young, wonderful wonder boy who has nothing to do with the slave, the runaway, the homeless kid, the thief that you meet early in the novel, except it's the same boy, and that's the point. So you actually literally see in this novel the transformation of the idea of childhood in Victorian England from the non-child worker, slave, tiny adult, to that sacred, somewhat artificial idea of childhood as the ultimate of innocence and purity that at least most of us in America partly inherited from England, the same way we inherited our language. But again, I don't want to assume that that's the idea that you got or where you got it. Now, I'm asking you in this discussion to talk a little bit about you. Where did you get your idea of childhood? And I'll get you started by talking about mine, right? So when this silly Oliver movie came out, the musical that I made you watch several clips from, I hope you enjoyed them, I know those songs by heart. Because coincidentally, Oliver in the film is supposed to be 10 years old, in the book, 10 years old. How old was I when the film came out? 10 years old. Oh, I'm dating myself. But true. So I know those songs by heart because they were a huge part of my childhood. As was the Disney Mary Poppins movie that we'll get to later, as was the Disney Peter Pan movie that we'll get to later, all right? In fact, I identified with Oliver. Well, really, I identified with the Artful Dodger, who went on to become the actor that plays the Artful Dodger in that 1968 film. He went on to become a huge child star in this very cringy, slightly hallucinogenic, very 60s, slightly LSD children's huge hit show called H.R. Pufnstuf. I didn't inflict the videos on you, but you can Google it up on YouTube as a video if you want. It's painful and silly and so 60s, but it was part of my life growing up. And that's one of the ways that I have some idea of what it means to be a child. Because I was given that by Disney, by the American media, by television, by Hollywood, by Broadway. Those are where my ideas of childhood came from. And yes, I grew up reading Dickens. I grew up reading Alice in Wonderland. I grew up with these books. Now, where did you get your ideas of childhood, and where did they come from? And did they have anything whatsoever to do with this strangely imported really very middle class, we want to be upper class, British anxiety about our children will not work. Thank God Dickens, where did he get his ideas of childhood? He got them because he was that kid. His father, his middle-class father, was thrown into a debtor's prison when he was 12 years old. Dickens was not in prison with his father, as some of the younger children were. That's how hideous it was back then. All right? So his father was not in prison, but Dickens knew that world from the ground up, and he clawed his way up from the ground up, from the lower classes to the upper classes, as one of the world's most important, most successful, and most politically potent writers. Virtually all of the anti-child labor laws that we have in the world, can be traced back to this book that you're reading today, Oliver Twist. So pay attention to it and tell me what it has to do with your world now. Go, hit the button, push reply, discussion, week 1, reply. Who are you? Where did your ideas of childhood come from? Respond to me, respond to your peers, and tell me what you think.